Okay, now it says we're live. We're good. I have no
Hi,
clue. We're
Robin.
live half the times. Hi, Sammy. How are you doing?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm doing really good. I'm so glad that you had a chance to be able to meet with me and be able to talk and be my first person on our podcast here for Healing for the Soul. I'm very excited to have you, like I said, not just as a guest, but being able to talk about this very important subject, which is how to end the cycle of blaming ourselves for different things. So, welcome. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a topic that's very important to me because we can literally take anything that happened to us and prolong it unnecessarily and keep ourselves from healing just by adding this layer of guilt and blame for ourselves. So, very excited to be here, and I love what you do, and I love how much work you put into what you do. You pour everything into it. So, I'm so glad to be here, Robin.
Well, I really appreciate it. So, when you talked about for the little snippet that you just gave about like the self blame part of it, like where did you find your passion first off in the self blame part for ending that?
Well, so as like anyone else, for me too, guilt was such a big part growing up. It's instilled in us. It's a very survival mechanism from that tribal point of view because we're social creatures. And if someone has guilt, the tribal mentality is that they're not going to repeat that and hurt the tribe. So that comes very much from our caveman days, right? Like if
Mm-hmm.
they couldn't really afford for one member of the tribe to be bad because if they were the opposite tribe, could come and wipe out that entire tribe. So that's where that comes from. However, in modern day, guilt doesn't really serve us that much because we can take the right actions without the guilt. But however, when we add guilt on top of what we already are doing, and stop me if I'm, ever being too cryptic or going too fast, but I just want to be very clear about this, is that what guilt in fact does is it mixes with our identity. So if I do something wrong, and I try to correct my behavior by saying, oh, I did this because I'm bad, then our brain latches onto very strong statements like that. I'm bad, or I'm this, or I'm a social person, or I'm just a quiet person, or I'm an introvert. It takes that very seriously because it's a command. And the ego loves personality to be very, very fixed because that to it, the ego means certainty. Ego loves certainty. So when I say something like, I'm bad, that's why I did this, I've already created a resistance to change by saying I did this because I'm bad, because the ego's like, well, if you're bad, then you have to repeat bad behaviors. So it will actually subconsciously drive me to repeat the very behavior that I'm trying to change. So when I learned this very early on, I'm like, this is the most useless emotion that we can have in modern day. I could see how it served us a long time ago, but it doesn't anymore. In fact, it's an excuse to stay locked in the same comfortable toxic cycle. So that's what got me really passionate about working through this with my clients.
That is awesome because it's like now you're making me think about all the different things for like my own self that I'm like, let's see, I do blame myself for this, and then it's like what you said though, it does lock it in. It's just amazing to me like how our brains like once it locks something in, it is so difficult just to get rid of that. Not even to get rid of it because it's like you don't want to get rid of it, but it's like allowing it to process through. That's the part that is like for me, I'm just like why do we have some of these yet? Like, and it makes sense with the caveman days, like what you had just said. Totally makes sense because it's like, yeah. So that answers one of my other questions I was going to ask too, was about like where does that blaming of ourselves come from? At
Mm-hmm.
the same time.
Well, so like you said, partly I answered that with the caveman days, but let's kind of fast forward to present time. Our parental and teacher and school conditioning is also such that our parents sometimes want those very quick sort of fixes, right? They want that short-term fix. So I
Yes.
did something bad. I broke my mom's favorite jewelry box, right? Her response in that moment is not going to be, oh, how do I create a cycle that feeds into itself in a positive way to get her to do things that, will be good for her? In that moment, she's thinking quick resolution. How do I make sure if she's done this, she doesn't tomorrow break my china? So the quickest way to do that is to say bad, right? Like you're bad,
Yeah.
because that will get her results in the very, very short term. The reason why it'll get her results in the short term is because I'll link so much pain to doing or touching anything of hers, doing anything around the house, and I will want to withdraw. My mom will get the results she wants because I won't touch anything, because I won't even want to move. I'll just want to stay in bed, because that creates so much
Okay.
pain, right? Because to a child, in
Yeah.
order to survive, needs their parents' approval. So I don't want to upset her, so I'll just withdraw. But because our subconscious thinks in patterns, big, broad patterns, it doesn't have the ability to discern like our conscious left brain does. It doesn't have the ability to say, oh, this only applies to this. It likes to form big, big generalizations. So what it's going to do is it's going to say, don't touch anything of hers. In fact, don't even go near her. And I might start to withdraw, right? That could be one of the things that
Okay.
I do. And so my mom will think, oh, that worked. Great, right? But she won't realize that she might have set into motion a chain of events that's going to cause me to blame myself and withdraw and go into a freeze response anytime that I feel like I've done something wrong. So instead of
Oh, wow.
sort of reprimanding or correcting the behavior, what she's actually done is created an identity of me as a mess up, as a person that lets people down, as someone that hurts my family. So that cycle will tend to play in itself, because my brain will be like, oh, your mom used that strategy to correct your behavior, so now I'll use the same strategy. And then that's what locks in our identity permanently.
Wow. That's a lot then. It puts a lot more on parenting as it is. Because I mean, like, parenting alone is a lot of work. Lord knows I've known that, like, with all the kids I've got and still trying to do everything else. But no,
Mm-hmm.
I know, like, my biggest habit, like, with the kids is that I take and I put a lot of that self-blame, like, I haven't gotten, because so, like, when I was a kid, I always imagined myself being, like, the perfect mom. Now that I know the perfect doesn't really exist, but I'll be like, I always imagined myself as, like, the perfect mom, having where I'd have, like, the baby books, I'd have all the, like, the first time they sat up, the first time they did this, and first time they did that, and I'm sitting here, like, on kid number 5, like, I've got nothing. I'm sorry, I got, like, nothing. I got handprints and I got stuff like that, but I don't have any of their first. So it's like, um, how we're talking about this self-blame, like, really makes sense, because it's like with my kids, I'm being more cautious with them to not, like, I out loud, like, in our house, my kids are not allowed to say bad or naughty, because I'm like, I only have good kids. And that's the truth. So I'm like, I just keep telling them, like, and when they break my stuff, I'm just like, that's okay. I can get a new one. It's okay. But the cat was a
Mm-hmm.
whole other level.
No, no, this is good. This is good, Robin. And
Mhm.
with that example, obviously, I'm kind of painting an extreme picture to make a point, right? So it's
Well,
not that
yes, but that's
the
good
only
though.
right, right. So I just kind of want to drive the point home, but by no means do I mean that as a parent, you're not going to have bad days yourself. And there's going to be times when you might say something and it comes out harsher than you intended. There's going to be that. We have enough resiliency to
Yes.
bounce back. But what I'm getting at really is a pattern. If a parent has a pattern that behavior correction can only take this one form, and we never actually do any real parenting where we're like, hey, look, what you just did, you probably didn't know it was bad, but here's why it's bad, is because when I lose something, it hurts me. It hurts me in here, and it was something very important to me. Now, I'm not saying you did anything wrong, but in the future, let's talk about how this won't happen again. And we can get the kids involved in like some of that creative problem solving. And then the idea comes from them, so it's more easily implemented as well. So what I'm saying is we can
Mhm.
throw in a lot more of this, but I notice a lot of parents don't use this. They kind of just want that black and white thinking, either this or that. Like,
Yes,
if
and I
I
see
need
that a
to,
lot. And I don't mean to
Mhm.
interrupt, but I mean, like, I
No,
see
no,
that a lot too, because there's a lot of parents that don't explain to their child what they're doing, why, not explain, like why they're upset, but it's like they really need to explain to the child, okay, you did this, but this is what I'd rather have you do instead. I call it distraction, or like, I'm trying to think. My son, I was telling him to push the wall, but well, it is a distraction, but I forget, like, the technical term that
uh,
they use.
like in NLP, it might be something like the swish technique, right? Like you bring in
Yes.
a different point of view to break the pattern, basically a pattern
Yes.
interrupt.
Yes, and that's what it is. I'm like, I'm glad you remember the term because I'm like, I'm just like trying to remember. But no, like that's what I do with my son. Like when he does something, I'm like, I explain to him when he's in timeout. I'm like, let's take a deep breath and let's figure out why we can't do this. So let's do this instead. For him, it's we have to push the wall. And then I explain to him. But I think a lot of parents would, and it's not saying anything bad about parents in general, but it's just like really, if you can start with yourself, that healing first, I think that's more key because then that ripples out to everybody else. Like I've noticed that myself the most. It's like I've done so much healing. I know we're getting a little bit off topic, but I'm like, I was looking at my stuff from a couple of years ago, and I'm like, I've done all this in the last 4 years, and then here I am complaining that things aren't happening fast enough. And it's like, it does actually play into this self-blame. It really does, because it's like I was beating myself up because I'm like, things aren't happening fast enough. And then I'm like, then I seen that stuff from a couple of years ago, and I thought, what am I talking about? Why am I even doing this anymore? And so that's what I was actually wondering was like, how does blaming ourselves, does that affect parenting, or can it affect how we parent?
Yeah, so actually I was going to say exactly that, is that a lot of times it's not that the parents don't want the right thing for their kids. I believe that, most of the time they do. They just have their own traumas. And if they haven't been able to give themselves that same kind of break or that same kind of compassion, they're unable to extend that towards their children. And you'll notice this even in the language that they use. You'll see parents a lot of times saying like, oh, when I was your age, I didn't even get to have this. And, if I were in your shoes, you know what I would be doing. So if the parents are able to extend that compassion towards themselves, then they'll be able to naturally extend that towards their own children as well, right? But oftentimes our brain has a standard that says, look, if you're not allowed to get away with this, this other person can't either. It's just not fair. The brain does like its own brand of fairness. Might be not fair by anybody else's standard, but it wants things to be fair. So if I get yelled at, for instance, for even being 2 minutes late to work, and then I see my kids waking up like 20, 30 minutes late for class, right? I may not have been as angry if I had kind of forgiven myself for it, but because I was unable to do that, I couldn't, then when I see my kids, I would go into a rage. I don't have kids, but I'm just saying, right? I see this a lot, especially. And this is something that comes up a lot when I work with immigrant kids, especially, immigrants that came here from very hardworking countries, and now their kids have these luxuries that they didn't have themselves growing up. They make a lot of comparison and a lot of parallels that kids can't even relate to, because they're like, oh, like if you were from Thailand or if you were from India like me, then you would have to wake at 4 a.m. and you'd have to take like six buses to work or 6 buses to school and then come home and work on the farm. Then you would know. And the kid has no way of relating to that, because the kids are relating to their peers and they're like, that doesn't sound anything like what other kids are doing. To me, that sounds like a lie. And that just creates that divide between parents and kids, where kids are like, they don't understand me at all. They don't understand what my life is about. I'm worried about how I'm going to be accepted into this peer group because I don't have the latest video game. And to me, that right now is more important than what you're saying, these stories that sound like folklore to me, right? So we don't want that divide. We want a better communication where we can understand each other, right? Already a generational gap is so much, but on top of that, you add in different countries, different cultures. That can be really problematic.
Yeah, it definitely can be, because you're making me think about like how my parents were. They're like, we had to walk 5 miles in the snow just to take and get to the school bus and that's and that. And I'm like, all I had to do was walk like a quarter of a mile to get to the school bus. But that's a very good point though, because like I haven't dealt much with the immigration part of it on my end, but no, that is very there's a lot of things that I've never thought about. Of course, I was supposed, like we said, most of us don't, because we are diverse, yes. But I mean, like a lot of us, we don't deal with that on a day-to-day basis in the mindset of those who came from other countries to our country. And then they're like, then their kids, like what you just said, that definitely would make a huge difference, on all of that.
And what's really sad also is that by projecting that onto the kids, what I find a lot, and I think, Robin, this is also probably because it's California, where I'm at, I
Oh,
get that a lot
true.
more, right? But what I see is
Mhm.
that by projecting that onto the kids and saying things like, you're so lazy, you know how kids are your age in my country and stuff like that, then that starts to kind of become a subconscious command. And then they start to see that the kids are really not even doing the bare minimum, not even cleaning their room, not even like taking a shower, not even, doing that basic stuff, because they're constantly told you're lazy. So in their mind, they're like, well, I have that label already. It sounds like too much work to change it. So I'll just stay here. And that becomes their new comfort zone. So back to being able to forgive yourself, again,
Mhm.
realizing that I'm not going to get my childhood back. I'm not going to get to be a child now. It's too late. And I forgive myself for that. And I forgive the people that did that to me. Allows such a parent to kind of see the kid, meet the kid where the kid is now, rather than constantly drawing parallels from their own childhood, which are no longer relevant. So that's one of the things that we want to do, is by healing our own cycle of blame, we're actually healing generations of trauma.
Huh. That's pretty neat if you think about it. Because then that would affect not just like my kids, but would also affect their kids. Just that healing alone from one person, that affects a lot more people than just ourselves. Like a ripple would ripple out then more.
Mm-hmm.
That's extremely
Absolutely.
powerful. You're
Yes.
making you're making me think like different ideas now too, like how this blame really affects us like tremendously. I mean, like not just as parents, but um just as ourselves, just as humans. If you separate
Mhm.
like all the other titles that we've got in this world, I'm just saying, it's like it really comes down to how powerful that self healing is.
Yeah, in fact, Robin, it's so tricky and it's so sneaky, the self-blame, that I even caught something that you said earlier that made me really want to point this out, is that even in your own journey, you're like, I was trying to end my own cycle of self-blame. But you notice how tricky and sneaky it is that even came in through the back door. And the way that you were healing it was by saying, why do I blame myself? And then you were blaming yourself for blaming yourself. So it just came in through the back door as you were trying to heal. So you see how tricky it is and how careful we must be to not just use our healing as an excuse to put more blame and more pressure on ourselves. And Robin, you'll see that even as we start to have success with this, it'll still try to come in through the back door and say, you were doing so good at not blaming yourself last week. And this week you're blaming yourself. So now we're getting blamed for blaming ourselves this week that we weren't doing last week. So what we want
I
to do is
totally see it.
we want to watch the cycle, and we want to work through it for sure. But sorry to pick on you, by the way, but I really did
Oh no, you're
want to
no,
point
you're
this out.
perfectly fine though. I'm glad though when people bring this up, like when they catch things for me, because like I've had people catch the self-limiting beliefs that I still carry. I'm like, thank you, because now it gives me something to work on. Because like I swear, like the entire month of July, all it was for me was one bad thing after another, and I just kept accepting it. I'm just like,
Mhm.
thank you for showing me where I need to work on. Thank you for showing me that I had this unresolved issue with my sibling and with my mom. Thank you for showing me this, because otherwise I wouldn't have known. And then it's like my mind just like kept bringing up more stuff. And I'm like, you know what? It's okay.
Mhm.
It's just okay.
Yes.
And, like,
And as you work on it, you'll notice your brain will be like, oh, my turn. Like, you're healing this other stuff, Robin. You're being accepting. I need acceptance too. And it'll come up out of the woodworks. And then you're like, did I just increase or intensify my trauma? But it's not that. It's that old stuff now is coming up because it sees an opportunity for releasing. But I think what you're doing is great. I think that making that kind of space for things that go wrong and to make room for the present moment as it is the most beautiful, most wonderful thing we can do for ourselves.
I would agree with you, because I was actually at first, I'm like, maybe I'm just going crazy. And then I'm like, you know what? I remembered when you were talking about the reptilian brain through the AHA, the American Hypnosis Association. I remember that. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe just maybe, if I just accept what's going on around me, as my brain is just bringing up more stuff to work on, and I just accept it and be like, okay, let's just work on that area, just one more thing. And then it's like, it didn't, like, the issues that I was having did not seem as traumatic as it normally would have. And I think it is because I was accepting of just the crap that was being thrown at me. I'm just saying, it was a lot last month. Like
Mm-hmm.
my dog, and my dog was one of them. And then my deal with my son, and then the accident I saw last week. And I'm just like, and then a couple other things I had, I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to accept it. But I did
Mm-hmm.
not at any point let my subconscious mind win. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
was determined to still go to my Reiki, still learn that. I'm like, no, I am still doing this. I got 2 hours of sleep the first night, but I'm like, no, I am still doing this. I am not going to let my subconscious mind win and go back home to South Dakota. No, I am doing this now. And looking back on it, I'm so glad that I still pushed through it, because I know I would have been blaming myself had I
Yeah.
not pushed through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, Robin, this is great. What you're describing to me last month is the essence of mindfulness. A lot of times people think that mindfulness is about quieting the mind and just like pretending nothing's wrong and, we're all quiet and we're gelled out. No, it's acceptance of what's here now, acceptance of the present moment, making room for it. So what you were doing was actually making room for the present moment to be exactly how it is. That is true inner peace. What you might have really started the process of is actually deep, deep spiritual growth. And we can do that, number one, by acceptance.
That is huge. I feel a lot better knowing that one. So outside of me talking a lot about myself, for like these different issues, which is fine. I'm glad we're talking about this like in general, because I'm sure there's other people that are either viewing or listening in that are just like, how can I start this self healing? Like, where can I start this process of stopping the self blame? So, do you have like any tips that help a person stop this cycle?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the very first thing we want to do is obviously awareness. I know it's a cliche that it almost must start with awareness. We have to stop denying that we do this and say, no, everything's fine. I don't blame myself. I mean, I get down on myself sometimes. No, we have to actually see things for what they really are. That's the first step. The second step is to really understand and meet ourselves where we are now. So if I really blame myself, for instance, let's just say I feel like I hurt my family in some way. First, I have to be okay with that fact. I have to be okay that I did that. So, in order to do that, I have to catch up and say, these are the things that I did. And then we want to introduce compassion and humanity on that, right? So, we have to ask ourselves, is this something that I did that could have happened to anyone? Any human being could have done this, or anyone could have made that mistake. And what good does it do me now to dwell in that? And to be more solution oriented and say, okay, I admit it. This has happened. I even admit that I feel bad about it. I even admit that I've been blaming myself, and that's okay. Here on out, though, is a fresh moment. It's a fresh start for me to have a different sort of intervention, to have a different sort of perspective. From here on out, I'm going to be focused on solutions. What can I do differently? And doing this, Robin, we can tap into that inherent strength that's available in all of us. But a lot of times it's latent, it's hidden, it's hiding behind all that guilt and shame, waiting to be invoked. We invoke it by asking. We literally invoke it by asking and saying, okay, I understand I did this, but what do I do from here? Right? And that's how we get started on breaking that cycle.
I'm glad I'm there right now, because that's what I've been in the process of myself a lot more lately than usual. Is like, how can I move forward now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's a good thing my husband's better at that than I am, because he's like, I was having trouble with the computer. He's like, well, you can't do anything about it. So he's like, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't do any good to get mad at the computer. And I'm like, well, true, but I'd like to take it. I don't like computers. I just don't, because they get so frustrating. But it's like, it's good sometimes to have another person say, hey, It doesn't do any good. It just doesn't. And
Mm-hmm.
it took a long time for him to rub off on me on some of this, but it's like,
But
yeah,
no, it's
I'm
great that
glad that
he's
I'm
able to do that.
there.
Sorry, say that again.
I said I'm glad that I'm glad through our conversation that I'm picking up that, yeah, I am in that spot of, okay, it doesn't do any good to get upset about it. And like I was even thinking about actually, like when it comes to blaming ourselves, that it's like when we blame ourselves, it probably takes more energy just to blame ourselves than it does if we would
Mm-hmm.
just accept it, release it, let it go. And
Mm-hmm.
instead, it's like we hold on to it, and then our body's like, okay, well, where can I put this problem? Where can I put this one? And then it's like, then we wonder why we got the different
Mm-hmm.
aches, or like our shoulders. Like a lot of people are like the shoulders, like the weight of the world's on their shoulders. And it's like, it doesn't have to be though.
Mm-hmm.
So
I like what you said about carrying it in our bodies. We definitely care. I mean, you can feel it in your muscles, but over
yes.
time, we even carry it in our bones and in our cells, right? And our cell chemistry actually changes. So if, let's say, you get mad at the computer, which I'm very proud of you that you're starting to incorporate this new way of being, and you're letting your husband rub off on you, because this is really the start of, like I said, the deep growth.
Mhm.
But let's say if I get mad at the computer and I do it often, my cells will start getting used to accepting more adrenaline and less dopamine, which is the pleasure hormone. So over time, my cell is going to be like, if this is my cell, right? And
Mhm.
I could see it. So if this is where dopamine normally locks in, my cell is going to be like, well, Robin or Sammy doesn't give me a lot of dopamine, so let me atrophy this part and create more for adrenaline. So over time, our cells actually start asking for more stress hormone, adrenaline, because we've actually altered the receptors of our cells to kind of ask for more adrenaline and cortisol versus serotonin and dopamine. So then over time we actually desensitize ourselves to pleasure. The good news is we can build it back up, just like how people talk about the bacteria in your gut that actually ask for sugar, and when you're having a craving, it's actually the craving of the bacteria. Same analogy applies to our cells. Our cells actually start asking for stress. So that's why every single time that you're choosing, and your husband saying, don't get mad at the computer, it's not going to change it, this is actually you healing your body, your actual biology. Isn't that powerful that you're able to alter your cell receptors, inviting them to ask you to give them a different hormone than before? That
That is
changes your
just,
whole life.
that does, that's absolutely amazing. That's why I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm like thinking about myself. I'm like, I think I need to book a session with you because I'm like, gosh, because I'm like, my weight, my like the cortisol, like everything's like in my stomach area, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like, and then the sugar, I'm like, uh-huh. So I'm like,
Mhm.
that totally explains it. So yes, I think
And
I'm gonna
Robin,
book a session with you. I'm
you
I'm
know, I'm
not
always.
joking. I think I really do.
And you said something
That's
about cortisol
powerful.
that's very interesting. Is cortisol loves to store fat around the belly area with women because it thinks, oh, you're under high stress. Well, if you had a baby, we would want the baby protected, because the body doesn't know the difference between external stress, like physical stress, and emotional stress. So it just literally blanketly just puts weight around the belly very quickly, especially for women, because they're like, oh, we need to protect the baby. For men too, but more to protect the internal organs. But that is exactly why cortisol, the stress hormone, leads to weight gain, is because it thinks, oh, more protection, more cushion from outside stress. It doesn't know that the stress is internal. The stress is a boss yelling at us. We don't need to be holding on to more weight in order to deal with the boss. It thinks of it, oh, if an animal bit you, or if you were running from a tiger, it would be much better if the tiger had more to bite through before it got to your vital organs. So yeah, the body's
True.
very primitive that way.
That's just so awesome. I'm just like laughing so much. I'm like trying not to cry because I want my mascara to run. But I'm just like, that's just amazing because it's like, I'm glad you brought that up though too, because it's like even with the kids, I'm like, I've had 5 C-sections in a row, and it's like I was even going down that. I was starting that, and I'm like, you know what? It doesn't matter.
Mhm.
I'm just gonna love myself the way I am right now. So no, I'm glad you brought that up about the sugar, about the cortisol and all that. That's just absolutely amazing. You know, that
Mhm.
I really am enjoying this conversation a ton. You know, just like overall, it's just been an eye opener for me, and I'm sure for our viewers as well, and then also for the listeners. So, where can people get a hold of you and get in contact with you to book their session with you? Because I already know that I'm going to book one with you. I already know that.
Mhm. Well, my website is www.don'twaittolive.com. Oh, you froze. Okay, you're back.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's www.don'twaittolive.com, and from there you can find me. You can see some of the modalities that I use, some of the things that I can help with. There's a huge list of things. If it has an emotional component, we can probably work on it, find the root cause, and then just let go of it in a way that rewires the brain permanently. I'm very interested in neuroplasticity. I've read up all the research. I've actually been part of research that watches the MRIs to see more gray matter in the logical center and more shrinking of the fear center. So for me, neuroplasticity is the biggest thing we should be leveraging as soon as we have awareness about it. So this is something that causes permanent change. This is not just about, I feel really hyped and motivated. The techniques we use, the hypnosis we use, the imagery, the NLP that I use, causes permanent change in the structures of the brain and in the cells as well.
And that part is awesome, especially because it ripples out to everything else. Well,
Yes.
I appreciate it so much being able to talk with you this entire time and everything that we've discussed because it's been amazing for me. I'm just like, this is awesome. So I can
Yeah,
only
it's
imagine
been,
our viewers and our audience loves it too.
yes, this is a very important conversation that I think we just need to stop running away from and just face it. I've been blaming myself. Where do I go from here? I think that's the most constructive thing that we could be doing in this moment rather than just letting it perpetuate. Because this can affect our relationships. And once a good relationship that we know we destroyed because of self-sabotage is gone, then it's gone, right? So why damage the most beautiful things in our lives? Let's get a hold of this now, is what I always say, as soon as we become aware of it. And Robin, I
I
really
agree.
appreciate you having me here. It's been so great. And to see your smiling face, it's so nice on a Monday morning. It's morning for me. I know it's.
Yes, it's afternoon for me. It's almost 2.
Mm,
But no, I really appreciate being able to have you on here and be able to talk with you and everything, Sammy. I really, really appreciate it though. I'm so
same here.
grateful to have you here. So thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Robin. I will be talking to you very soon.
Yes, sounds good. Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome. Bye.